So it looks like we have all board members on board. It is 1:01, so it is time for us to begin. I will call to order this meeting of California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board for Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. This is a Zoom meeting. Members are kind of scattered all over the state as our staff, but we welcome anyone who is watching or who will be participating via Zoom or watching via YouTube. We begin our meeting with item 1, which is a roll call of members. Please show that the chair is present. Member Reeves?
Present.
Member Eng?
Present.
Member Allen?
Present.
Member Kent-Monning?
Present.
Okay, let the minutes show that all members are present. We move now to approval of the minutes from our February 17th, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Okay, it's been moved that we approve the minutes from February 17, 2021. We'll do a roll call vote. The chair votes aye. Vice Chair Reeves?
Aye.
Member Eng?
Aye.
Member Allen?
Aye.
Member Kent-Monning?
Aye.
Okay, please show the minutes of February 17, 2021 being adopted unanimously. Moving on now to item 3 on our agenda, the chair's report. First part of my report, as I do each month, I like to tell folks who happen to be watching how many cases the board members have resolved. These are second level appeals. Appeals go first to our judges in the field offices, and then if there's a further appeal, it comes to the board. And since our last meeting, February 17th, board members have reviewed and resolved 553 cases. Now, each of these cases is a dispute between an employer and a claimant, or almost all of those disputes between employers and claimants. And our board works very hard to make sure that the resolution is speedy and just. And in all these cases, we do have a decision made, and case parties have been or will soon be informed of the outcome. We know, by the way, that there have been problems with the UI process. There are many problems, and they've been well documented. I just want to make it clear that once our agency, the California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board, gets a case, our ALJs, our judges at the field office level, and our board members, when they get a second level appeal, really do all we can, strive to make sure that the hearings are fair, that parties are treated with dignity and respect, and that the outcomes are, cases are resolved as quickly as possible, given the large caseloads we have right now. And just as a point of comparison, and you'll hear more from other board members and from staff about how we're doing compared to the rest of the country, but there is an organization, the National Association of Unemployment Insurance Appeals Professionals, which represents all 50 of the states. And we do get statistics from them that let us know how we're doing. And I think Vice Chair Reeves will talk a bit about that, and perhaps Chief Judge Cutri as well. Just want to say, as part of my report, or the last part of my report, that about 2 weeks ago, I was appointed to be on the national board of CUIAB, this national association. So anything I can do to help us with regard to getting data that might be helpful to us as compared to the rest of the nation, I'm in a position now to do really, really easily. So want to make that clear to members. And with that, we will hear from the other members, starting with my Vice Chair, Dan Reeves. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start off by simply acknowledging and recognizing that a year ago to this month, a worldwide pandemic was declared, and we all went into lockdown. It's been a year since we've had a in-person board meeting. In fact, Kent-Monning has been on the board for about a year now, and I've yet to meet her face to face, which is just symbolic of many challenges that the state and nation is facing. As a result of the pandemic, over 4.5 million Californians lost their jobs. And thankfully, the federal government quickly approved pandemic relief funds to assist millions of Americans weather this storm. and stay home, frankly, to protect their health and the health of their neighbors. And when that happened, almost immediately, we saw skyrocketing number of appeals to the board. At the same, judges were facing a huge uptick in caseloads. Of course, they had to learn a whole new area of law. And at the same time, we needed to pivot from in-person hearings to telephonic hearings, while at the same time preserving the due process and the rights of claimants. And I want to thank the IT division of CUIAB, as well as all our staff who have done a miraculous job pivoting so quickly to an entirely new system of conducting hearings. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the many efforts the executive staff and the board chair, Mr. Block, have taken to address the timeliness and the time delays in processing appeals. Since the start of this pandemic, our board has hired, onboarded over 40 ALJs, which represents 67% increase in our overall ALJ workforce. And they are currently in the process of hiring another 20 ALJs to help us reduce the time delays in processing appeals, which is critically important. In addition to substantially increasing our staff capacities, the chair and the executive staff have increased case workloads per week. And not only has our ALJs met that new challenge, but they're actually exceeding that new target. And in fact, we have what I would call many super performers on our ALJ staff who are far exceeding the weekly target of cases to process in order to help Californians get a response on those appeals as quickly as possible. It's also my hope that in the current ongoing negotiations with our bargaining unit, that we can institute more creative incentives to encourage and reward our outstanding ALJs to process even more cases every week. Given the relative overall strength of the state's budget, I am very hopeful that in the May revise, we'll see a signal to the end of the furloughs, which will also help us reduce our time delays in processing appeals. And while we have a lot of work in front of us, I think it should be pointed out that the time delays is a national phenomenon in which every state is struggling with. The national average to process an appeal is over 103 days. Here in California, it is 75 days. While that's still too long, it is far better than the majority. And I want to credit our ALJs, our paralegal staff, and all the staff for their hard work. And I want to also point out that while the board is taking all these steps, that we are still getting cases 30 to 45 days after they've been decided. So before we even get our hands on these files, oftentimes more than a month has elapsed. So I will be working on trying to figure out, I'm sure all of my colleagues will as well, how we can assist EDD reduce those time delays. I know they're struggling with an enormous workload and frankly outdated computer systems, but that is something that's absolutely vital to sort of figure out so that we can meet our federally mandated timeliness standards. And then these are not the only challenges that we're facing. States across the nation have seen enormous upticks in fraud. And I'd like to close by applauding the chair, the executive staff, our ALJs, our IT unit, and most of all, our management service technicians who acted quickly last year to identify and single out suspected fraudulent benefit applications. In way of background, identity cases have always been a part of the work that this board does. But in 2019, we saw only a little over 13,000 of those cases. Yet in just the latter half of 2020, we went from 13,000 cases for the entire year of 2019, and between July and December of 2020, we saw 698 cases. And that increase is a direct result of EDD, who had the primary responsibility of identifying and verifying identity of applicants, to significantly ramping up their efforts to identify and root out fraud. Last year, our staff quickly identified patterns and signals of fraud, which were referred back to EDD for further examination and possible prosecution. And I want to thank our staff at every level for their quick actions, as well as the leadership that enable us to identify and root out large number of fake claims. While we still have many challenges in front of us, but as vaccinations ramp up, businesses reopen, and with a very strong state budget, I'm confident that we can meet the challenges in the upcoming months. And I look forward to working with my colleagues to take even more aggressive steps to ensure that Californians who are entitled to benefits don't have to wait a day longer than necessary. So with that, I thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to make that report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Reeves, for that very thorough report, making many important points that the public needs to be aware of. With that, we move to Member Eng. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and also Mr. Vice Chair. Following up on the Vice Chair's comments, I wanted to just make some brief comments on the issue of fraud. I wanted to thank Presiding Administrative Law Judge for Appellate Operations, Ms. Remke, for sending the board members a typical fraudulent case that we've been receiving. And what I noticed was that they seemed to be from a specific community in a specific street. So I began keeping a tally, and again, I'm only one board member and I don't see every case, but the majority of fraudulent cases that I've seen with regard to particularly ID fraud seems to come from specific communities, specific geographical areas, and even specific streets. And I would raise the question as to, although we're not the legislature and we're not another type of administrative board, I would raise the question as to whether we have a role to play to use the Vice Chair's words to assist the EDD, which, as we know, is undergoing tremendous challenges, and with $30 billion pledged from the most recent congressional package signed by the president, we know that the fraudulent, the incidences of fraud can only grow exponentially and not decrease. And so the question I have, and it doesn't have to be answered here, but is, do we have a role to assist the EDD in asking them if what they are doing in terms of outreach to those communities where the fraud seems to be coming from, whether there has been outreach, education to those communities. As we know, we can't send an investigator to every specific case that appears to be fraud. I mean, we can do that in a limited case, but that education often plays a role. So I would ask whether it would be appropriate to ask EDD that question, and whether it would be appropriate to make some suggestions because it's rather difficult to see the floodgates opening on fraud and not do anything about controlling the gates. And I think that there is a role to be played for the gatekeepers. So I do thank the EDD for the tremendous work they've done so far. This is not a criticism. And I want to thank the CUIAB, the California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Institution, for the work that they have done, and adding to my colleagues' comments for the quick thinking and quick acting. But that I do think that the challenges are going to be increasing even more so in the days to come. And again, this is not a question that I'm raising to be discussed today because it's not an agenda item, but perhaps something that could be, I could discuss perhaps between meetings. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the extent of my report and my comments.
Thank you, Mike. And, you know, the concerns raised by both you and Vice Chair Reeves are critically important to the state of California. We just need to keep in mind that EDD is the entity that is primarily responsible for both ferreting out fraud and for dealing with it. And it is clear when we get cases that raise any suspicion of fraud, we remand them back to EDD for further action. Now, any trends you've seen in terms of communities or groups that are more prone to make fraudulent claims, I think anything to that of that nature, Mike, you should reduce to a memo and send that on to Chief Judge, Executive Director Cutri, and Mike Cutri can work with EDD to pass on to them any suggestions that we have, because we are certainly a partner in this, and we all need to work together to reduce the fraud as much as possible. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it is not our primary responsibility to deal with these fraudulent cases. They should be weeded out before they get to us. But of course, to the extent they're not, we will raise suspicions and send cases back to EDD. With that, we turn to Board Member Allen.
Yes, essentially, these comments I'm making are comments that I make almost at every meeting, but I think they need to be emphasized. I just want to express my extreme gratitude to my colleagues on the board, to every level of our organization, whether it's be the clerical support staff, our field judges, our appeals judges, our management team. God bless IT that we can meet remotely like this during difficult times. And I totally agree with the comments made by the board chair and vice chair. And I'll just point out that the obvious, we're living in unprecedented times, which cause for unprecedented measures. And I think that essentially we are doing our utmost best for the people of California. I'm proud of our organization. And I look forward to us getting through this. As you know, I'm the veteran. I was the newest and I was the oldest board member for a while, but basically I've seen a lot. And I know that everyone is doing their utmost best to be of service to our communities and to the public. And on a closing note, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you, Michael. Moving now to Board Member Kent-Monning.
Thank you, Chair Block. I want to just send some thanks out today. And I am in the Bay Area Office of Appeals today. People might notice a different background that I have. I'm in a hearing room, and it's the 1-year anniversary of me being on this board. And it's the second time ever that I've been in an actual office of this agency. So it's a fitting timing for this. And I just want to thank Acting Presiding ALJ Chiselle for accommodating me here, and then also to the staff supervisors, Mary Lou Jacob and Monet May. They got me all set up in here, and it's been really nice to see some real people at a distance. And also I want to thank Chief Cutri. We've worked this past month along with the presiding judges on something that I was wanting some assistance with that I just want to give an update on, and that was assuring that evidence that our parties are submitting given that we're all working remotely, judges are some at home, some people are in the offices, assuring that evidence that's submitted is timely making it to the files before a decision is issued. So it seems like a small tweak, but with Chief Cutri's work and coordinating with presiding judges, we're wanting to just assure that, with timeliness in mind, an extra day here or there to make sure that that evidence is actually matched to the file before a decision goes out really makes or break it for something like these ID cases. So I want to just thank Chief Cutri and the presiding judges for working on that with me, and just verbalizing my commitment to do all of these behind the scenes kind of communication, even though we are all distanced. But when everyone has a different role in this process of the cases, it's so important that we are able to use our technology, communicate with each other, and make sure that a small tweak here or there to our processes can really make a difference for our parties and our claimants to make sure that we're doing the best that we can to timely process these cases. So thanks to Chief Cutri and the presiding judges for working on me with that. And just in general, thanks to everyone for keeping up the hard work. These numbers that we see are daunting, but the devotion that everyone has and processing these cases is very impressive. And I think people need to remind themselves that even though it is a high volume of cases and we're not hitting the numbers that we would like, as compared to the national landscape, our agency is doing really well and people's work is paying off. And that's the commitment we have to keep making to Californians. And I appreciate everyone for doing their part. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Kent-Monning. I want to thank all the board members for their thorough and insightful comments today. We move on now to item number 5 on our agenda, which is time for members of the public to make comment. I'd like to ask our moderator, are any members of the public lined up to make comment?
Chair Block, we do not have any hands raised for public comment at this time.
Okay, in that case, we'll move on to item number 6, a report by our Executive Director and Chief ALJ, Mike Cutri. Mike?
Good afternoon, Chair Block and board members. Thank you. At the risk of going over some of the same items that Vice Chair Reeves touched on, and to that extent also, Member Eng and Kent-Monning, I'm sorry, my screen is a little bit is scattered right now. I will go over a couple of those common items, but I'll begin my report with a timeliness and workload summary, and then I'll summarize a series of field operations events that have occurred since the last report. We had a brief let-up in January, but then February saw another dramatic increase in appeal transmittals from EDD. It amounted to more than double the monthly transmittals of the pre-pandemic levels. EDD, as mentioned, acknowledged in February that it is taking 4 to 6 weeks to send appeals to CUIAB, and that has been occurring since December. It is impossible under those timelines for us to improve our short-term timeliness figures, which measure 30 and 45-day disposition rates. And as a consequence, the field offices have an opportunity to focus on the oldest cases to avoid further claim delays and provide appeal resolution to those who have waited the longest. So against that backdrop, I'll talk about some of the timeliness measures for February. The Department of Labor requires that 60% of cases be closed within 30 days. And we remain at a 5% mark in February as we did in January, bringing our yearly average to 50%. The Department of Labor requires that 80% of cases be closed within 45 days. We fell to just over 9% in February, bringing our yearly average to 72%. The average case age for pending cases, as mentioned by Vice Chair Reeves, actually dropped from 75 to 73.9 days. It shows that our dedication to move the oldest cases, despite the huge delay in getting them, is producing results for people who are waiting. A little bit of perspective, as Vice Chair Reeves mentioned, is necessary as we look at our timeliness figures. Nationwide, average case aging sits over 30 days higher than at CUIAB at 103 days. To say that this is a national struggle is an understatement. We continue to implement a number of strategies to try to improve the timeliness numbers for the public who are waiting. In addition to the judges we onboarded last year, we've onboarded another 21 so far this year. We have training cohorts, one of which begins on Friday and another a month later to onboard those new judges, and we have ongoing recruitments for judges and staff. Even with the improvements in public health, it is still impossible for us to maintain traditional team calendars which occur in person. As a result, judges are hearing elevated caseloads. And as Vice Chair Reeves mentioned, we have volunteers to take on much higher numbers, and we're exceeding all standards in that regard. The presiding judges continue to hear complex and varied caseloads in very high numbers in addition to their ordinary duties. The field has operated at a very high capacity since last March. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the field office staff and judges for maintaining high quality standards amid the many insecurities that the pandemic has brought. As we grow, that growth is enabled by the hard work of our administrative services, IT, and training teams. It's often done behind the scenes, but under similarly challenging circumstances in the pandemic. To highlight some of those challenges, we had a number of noteworthy events since the last report. The Orange County office was closed due to a positive COVID test on March 3rd. It was cleaned, and with the help of all of those aforementioned departments, reopened without further issue. That same week, the Los Angeles office was briefly closed on March 5th due to a bomb threat. We coordinated with local law enforcement. The closure was brief, and we reopened fully the same day. Unfortunately, 3 other phone threats were made to field offices since the last report. CHP was consulted on each, and no further incidents have been reported. In a couple of good news and congratulation notes, I'm happy to report that we received clearance 2 weeks ago to provide proof of employment letters to all employees, which means that depending on their regional vaccine tier, they may be eligible for vaccine now or coming soon. To close my report today, I would like to recognize the contributions of the retiring presiding judge of the Pasadena Office of Appeals, Silva. Our last day with the agency was Monday. Judge Silva joined CUIAB in 1990 and became Pasadena's presiding judge in 1996, where she managed until her retirement last week, except for a brief stint as the director of training when that position existed. She led a highly successful office through countless challenges during her tenure. She is beloved by her staff and judges, and a wonderful mentor and colleague to her fellow presiding judges. On behalf of the agency and personally, I'd like to wish Judge Silva much health and happiness in her retirement, and we all look forward to getting together in person when circumstances allow. That concludes today's report. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mike. Questions or comments for Chief Judge Executive Director Cutri? We'll begin with Vice Chair Reeves.
I just want to thank you, Mike, for your thorough report and the updates along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Member Eng. Mike, you are muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Chief LJ, Mr. Cutri, if you could extend my personal greetings and thanks to Judge Silva. I knew her in another capacity in which I served, and she, when I had to start my IT with CUIAB, she invited me over to use their facilities on a number of occasions. So I really appreciate her long years of public service. Mr. Cutri, I also wanted to thank you for starting the implementation of the more clear explanation of the LWA, the Lost Wage Assistance, and the Fed state extension language at the field level. It's making it easier for both the claimant and the panel to review the decision. And also, again, extending another appreciation for our monthly chats of a general nature. I wanted to ask if there was a way of making a reporting of the court cases that are appealed beyond the CUIAB level more robust, so that the board could be better advised of the outcomes. I also wanted to ask you about the $30 billion in additional unemployment insurance benefits that are going to be coming to the state of California as a result of the recent stimulus and relief bill. What impact do you think that will have on the board moving forward. For example, at what point do we need to anticipate needs assessment in terms of adequacy of our ALJs, our staff, et cetera, and also anticipating that there will be, as I pointed out earlier, just as much fraud, if not more. What steps can be taken now from our perspective to meet the challenges that will be coming, that we know will be coming, as we are California unemployment insurance is the target of, probably international theft rings. So with that, I have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Mike Cutri, do you want to respond at all?
Sure, I'd like to touch on a couple of those in order, and if I missed anything, please be sure to re-ask. Pertaining to the extensions that are coming, every time Congress passes a benefits extension, which it has several times during this pandemic and many times during the Great Recession, it requires us to coordinate with EDD to define their implementation practices and then to anticipate which appeals will be coming our way as a result. In terms of basic eligibility, the issues should remain similar, but there are ongoing eligibility issues for someone who collects long-term benefits, and we fully expect to see those issues appear before us. That said, we have, in all circumstances, a very generous run-up until those cases start flowing through EDD, and we work with EDD to find out when that's happening so that we will have all of our legal standards in place by the time they arrive. I hope that answers the question on the new stimulus package. With regard to the fraud issue, keeping in mind our adjudicatory process and that EDD is the investigatory agency involved in fraud, and without speaking to any specifics that we discover along the way about detecting fraud, we have a very robust system in place for any fraudulent efforts that end up in appeals. The first and foremost being that we conduct evidentiary hearings under oath with live claimants and live parties. And so that enables us to deep dive into substantiation of identity and claims at a level that EDD is quite simply not able to do upon initial claim filing. So I remain optimistic that our judges are very well equipped to ferret out fraud in individual claims as they appear in appeal hearings.
Thank you, Chief Judge.
Thank you.
Moving on now to Member Allen.
Yes, Judge Cutri, thank you so much for your in-between meetings briefings in real time to find out what's going on with the agency. I thank you for that. I just wanted to go back to your safety and security report. Are you feeling confident that we're doing everything possible to protect our staff, both for health and safety and for security?
With regard to health and safety,
Yes.
I think we've made tremendous grounds. Our admin services team is incredibly prompt. The pandemic has presented incredible challenges to our agency and our field operations because so much of what we do is in-office work. But our cleaning and our notification and coordination has been top-notch. So I am confident that we've done everything we can do, and I'm optimistic that those events will get fewer and fewer until there aren't any. With regard to office security, we have a very robust partnership with CHP, and they've been very responsive to our needs. And so those items are brought to our attention immediately by the presiding judges and supervisors in the offices and acted upon quickly by executive staff and CHP.
Thank you. The other question I had is one out of curiosity, because so many of our cases are dealing with documents and verification of various facts. I was just wondering, to what degree do we receive them electronically, these documents, and to what degree are they being mailed in? What's the proportion? I was just curious.
That's a difficult number for me to give you with any certainty. We currently receive documents from parties by mail, fax, sometimes dropped off, and now electronically. And they all end up largely in the same workflow as they attempt to be sorted and provided to either the case file or the judge who already has the case file. I've received a similar inquiry, and it's just difficult to parse out unless we take a small sampling, and I'm happy to do that in an office where we can take a couple of days of sampling and give you a rough percentage. If you'll give me some time, I'll get that for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Member Kent-Monning.
Just to thank you again, Chief Cutri, for, as others have mentioned, your availability to the board members, and then for this past month getting into the weeds with me on some of these, field office procedure type questions, which I really appreciated your help, and hopefully we can see a couple tweaks that will make things better for parties and for people working so hard in our offices to process all of that, as you mentioned, hard mail, electronic mail, faxes, everything that's coming in. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your insights.
Thank you, Laura. At this point, we will move on to item number 7 on our agenda, which is a report by our presiding administrative law judge for appellate operations, Jodi Remke. Jodi?
Good afternoon, Chair Block and board members. I'm going to be going over, as always, the key performance indicators established by the Department of Labor, page 36 in your packets there. And so the first one is the requirement to complete 50% or more of the cases in 45 days or less. In February, as in recent months, we continued to do well with that. We were at 87.4%. So a very strong month again for us. Unfortunately, it's our yearly average is just going up a little bit too slowly. The yearly average at the end of February was 44.6%. And then the other requirement, 80% or more of the cases in 75 days or less. Again, February, we did great, 92.6%. Yearly average, 96.8%. So I've discussed before, it's really this close window for us with the board of 30 days. Then we're going to make that 45 days or not, but then we're always really almost, as you can see, 96% of the time making the 75-day. So again, monthly, we're doing very well. The issue is just we very surprisingly have a smaller inventory at the board. And so it just takes more cases to get the yearly average up than we're getting able to process on a monthly basis. Again, though, the average pendency for open cases is at 23 days, and the standard is 40 days or less. So we're looking really strong right now. I'm not confident, unfortunately, as I've probably said in the past, I was confident that we're going to make the year average of 50% or more of those cases at 45 days or less. I think it's going to be close. And again, we've really improved in the last several months, which is great. And we're going to have a strong position going into next year.
Thank you, Jodi. Any questions or comments for presiding Judge Remke? Begin with Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jodi, for that presentation. I'm very pleased to see that the average timeline is 23 days, which exceeds all of our standards from a federal timeliness standard. Just remind me, it's at the end of this month that the calendar year for the federal timeliness standard closes?
Correct.
So we're not going to probably meet that 45-day window. And
it's just a case number at this point, you know, how many cases of the year, 50% or more of those total cases. And it's literally going to be probably only hundreds of cases of a difference of making it or not making it.
Right. And I know over the course of the year, we have shared some resources with the field operations in order to try to help get those numbers down in terms of timeliness. But what you just hit upon is that we've had, like, in terms of the caseload at the board level, do you have any sense for why we've seen a tail off in terms of cases, even though, as Mr. Cutri has mentioned, at the field office level, we've seen a continued rise?
Yeah, I think as we've talked about in previous months, one indication is the ID cases. which was such a high number in the field, and either those were being reversed, and so they're not appealed, or they're being set aside and referred back to EDD, again, not appealing it to us. So I think that's a big factor. And again, hopefully the PUA cases and other emergency assistance, it was an issue of perhaps, as been stated, EDD may not have the ability to sit down and gather all the evidence that we do at the hearing, which again then allows us to be able to reverse some of those determinations and then award benefits. So again, we're not seeing the appeal. So again, I think it's just an overall issue of what is happening at the field and what's left to appeal to us.
Right, I guess that makes sense. I mean, we are dealing with a new area of law, so making predictions are much more difficult. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jodi.
Thank you, Dan. Moving on to Member Eng.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd love to be confused for Mr. Reeves anytime, so please continue to do that. Judge Remke, thank you again. I wanted to follow up on my comment to Chief Cutri to thank you for the way that the LWA and Fed state extension language that has come at the appellate level to add to some of the field decisions that have not yet caught up the latest instructions. Those are very helpful, I think, to the claimant and as well as to the panel, and demonstrates much more transparency and helping the claimant to understand why their benefit was not granted in a much more lay language. And thank you also, wanted to thank you for the latest UIPL changes which expand on the eligibility for pandemic benefits. I think those, I think there were 3 instances that were in the memo that I think is very, very helpful moving forward. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Move on to Member Allen.
Yes, Jodi, I would like to say that every once in a while we have a very close case or a case that's a little bit complicated. And I think I'm very appreciative of your help on those cases. I always find your comments always clarifying and lucid and helpful in trying to get to the right answer on those cases. So I just wanted to express that to you, that you're truly appreciated. And thank you for your good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Moving on now to Member Kent-Monning.
Well, PJ Remke, Member Allen said basically what I was going to say. I just want to, for anytime there's a question, it's within minutes that you make yourself available so that we can dive into a case together, and it's really spectacular. So thank you for always providing us board members with your support and strong analytical skills as we parse out these tough cases. So thank you. Of course.
Thank you, Laura. With that, we move on to item number 8 on our agenda, which is a report by Chief Information Officer Jeff Willoughby. Jefferson.
Good afternoon, Chair Block, members of the board. First, an update on our modernization project. We continue to progress in the highly complex appeal scheduling and procedural hearing components of the projects, and we're getting almost to the completion of the scheduling part now, which is really good news. Our teams, both inside IT and the subject matter experts throughout the business, remain very focused on really detailed testing of the new system, and we're seeing more and more functionality. It's accretive as these sprints go on. So we're starting to see a more highly functional product, which is really good news. As I'm sure Admin Chief Silva will report shortly, IT and our other board departments are working through our budgeting call letter exercise for this year. You should know that one of our primary and ongoing areas of focus is information security, and we continue to invest in technology to keep private information private for parties to our hearings, for our employees, and for the organization at large. So some of that works behind the scenes. For that requires user intervention. You'll see internal communication soon on how these new security models are implemented for us. So a fairly brief report this month, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jefferson. Turn to Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Jefferson. I do not have any questions at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Member Eng.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Information Officer, Mr. Willoughby, I wanted to tell you I was gratified with the speed and efficiency of the fix for the Microsoft degradation of the 0365 service. I hadn't seen that before and just wanted to ask, is that something that was just one-off, or is that something that might be systemic and repetitive?
So it was a global outage. We were not the hardest hit by any stretch, and as much as I'd like to be able to take credit for the restore of all of those services, that was Microsoft working as quickly as they could to rectify the issue. They identified it in fairly short order. I don't believe that we were in the path of that major outage. We had some services that were not working as advertised for a period of time, but as in any area of technology, there is an opportunity for that technology to fail on occasion. This happened to be something that Microsoft thought they were fixing, and they did not. so they rolled it back, and could it happen again? Yes, absolutely. Do we anticipate that it will happen again? There's no way for us to predictively do that. We assume that it might, and we take as many steps as we can to make sure that we can continue to do our jobs should an outage like that occur.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Moving on to Member Allen.
Yes. Hi, Jefferson. I've got a couple of asks for you. I did read the update on the modernization project, but when I went to the link to get more information, I was blocked and not having access to it. So I'd asked that that block be removed so that I could find out more about the modernization project. The second comment, and I realize the comment I'm going to make now has to do with after you've got the system in place and it's up and working, but this came up in our, when we appeared before the Senate for our confirmation hearing. I have a real concern that when we do have our new system online, that those people who have unstable living situations, those who are homeless, that we provide ways for them to be able to submit their documentation electronically, as well as, of course, they can do it on paper. But just to give special thought to that, because it always concerns me when I see these cases where people are in very unstable living situations, wanting to make sure they get a fair shake. So thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Michael. Moving on now to Member Kent-Monning.
Thank you, Chief Willoughby. I just wanted to thank you for the buzz. I don't know who's responsible for that, but everyone who's responsible for those updates, it is really helpful to see kind of the breakdown and the visuals and all of that. It really goes a long way, at least for the way I process information. So thank you, and for all the continued hard work on all IT fronts.
Of course.
Thank you, Laura. With that, we move on to item number 9 on our agenda, which is report from Chief Administrative Services Officer Rob Silva. Rob.
Thank you, Chair Block. Good afternoon. I'm going to start with a little hiring update. Vice Chair Reeves and Chief Cutri reported on hiring. This is sort of a granular update to what's going on with the hiring. As you know, we've had the recent recruitment for 20 administrative law judges, with 10 of those 20 have started, and will start the training that Chief Cutri mentioned this coming Friday. We also have start dates for an additional 6 ALJs, and an offer of employment is currently pending with the 17th of the 20 ALJs. In addition, we hired a retired annuitant administrative law judge with a start date of tomorrow, and we have 2 more who have just submitted documentation to return as retired annuitants. Since last month's board meeting, we've also filled 8 support staff positions in field operations. We have had a couple of support staff recently announce retirements, so we will move quickly to backfill those positions as well. I also have a procurement update. As Jefferson alluded to, we had the branches of CUIAB submit call letter requests for the 2021-22 state fiscal year. And after reviewing those requests, which were all submitted at the end of February, we were able to identify a number of smaller ticket operational items to move forward with procuring in the current fiscal year. In addition to the information security software that Jefferson mentioned, IT staff is also preparing purchase orders for barcode readers, label printers, and replacements for older production printers. And they have until this Friday, March 19th, to submit those purchase order requests. That is the fiscal deadline for IT standard items. The fiscal deadline for non-IT purchases is April 21st. Admin services staff is preparing purchase orders for a number of items for incoming employees, utility carts, furniture, headsets, and some ergonomic items that we foresee needing for folks, as well as replacement for a number of production copiers whose 5-year maintenance service agreements expire at the turn of the fiscal year. This purchase is key because I don't know if it's like a diabolical design plan or just sheer coincidence, but as soon as these agreements aren't in place around month 61, 62, these machines typically begin failing. So replacing them with units that have new service agreements is really key because that ensures that all of the repairs will be handled within a 24-hour period. And with our current workload, we can't really afford to have equipment down for a longer period than that. All of that equipment does get redistributed, repurposed throughout the state of California. The Employment Development Department will first work to see if someone within the labor agency that's a little further away from the front lines of pandemic-related workload can utilize the machines, and if not, they will go to the Department of General Services for that same purpose. I also have we're engaged in a couple of lease extensions, actually 3 different lease extensions, lease renewals in our LA, Ventura, and Sacramento areas. I probably will have something more finite for next board meeting on those, but I wanted to let the board know that we're working on a few lease projects. And I don't have anything further unless you have some questions.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Any questions for Chief Administrative Officer Silva? I'll begin with Vice Chair Reeves.
I don't. Thank you, Rob, from your black boy. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Member Ng.
Thank you, Mr. Silva. No questions for me.
Thank you, Mike. Member Allen.
Yes, Rob. Can you describe what kind of remodeling is being done at the central office?
I don't know specifically what we're doing. It's scheduled, I think, in May. We just sent something out, but I'll be happy to update you after this meeting in an email with what's going on. It shouldn't be terribly disruptive, but I'll be happy to share with everyone what's going on, if that works for you.
Well, I know someday we'll come back to the office, so I was curious. Thank you.
Sure. I'll send something.
Thank you, Michael. And Member Kent-Monning.
I believe it's mostly repainting and recarpeting, if I've read the email correctly, but Chief Silva, you might have additional details, but if I can help spare you the work on that, I just, so.
Well, I do know recarpeting is part of it because we're having each floor weigh in on carpet design, so that is one component, yes.
Well, no question, just thank you for all the hard work. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Looking at my agenda, I see no closed session items for today. Is that correct, Chief Counsel Wusam?
That's correct, Chair Block.
Thank you, Mark. In that case, unless we've missed anything on the open agenda, I don't think we have, we will declare this meeting closed. We are now adjourned. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.